Willoughby, the little black dachshund puppy, with the brown nose and brown paws, was very excited. He was waiting in his favourite place, the wall beside the gate to Willow Cottage garden centre, waiting and waiting and waiting. It seemed to Willoughby that time was going very slowly. That morning, when she fastened on his collar, Mrs. Ann said to the little dachshund that she had a surprise for him, and he would like it. Now, if Mrs. Ann thought he would like something, Willoughby was sure he would, because he knew that Mrs. Ann was the best missus a little dog could have. Then Mrs. Ann added, "We're going to have visitors." Willoughby liked visitors. Usually there was only Mrs. Ann, Mr. Jack, little Johnny, and Grandpa Tom living at Willow Cottage, and sometimes he wished there were other dogs to play with. Then Mrs. Ann said, "Mrs. Jane is coming, and she's bringing Tara with her, so we will have a great time. She's going to stay with us until Christmas." Willoughby wagged his tail hard. Next to Mrs. Ann, he loved her sister Mrs. Jane, and he also loved Tara, because she was Mrs. Jane's dachshund. Tara was a grown-up dachshund, not a puppy like Willoughby, but she was great fun, and always played games with Willoughby when she came to visit. Now she was going to stay until Christmas. Then Mrs. Ann added, "They're bringing a surprise with them, and we will all have a great time." Willoughby sat beside the gate, wishing and wishing the visitors would arrive. He thought the time would never pass. Then suddenly Mrs. Jane's car appeared round the corner. The visitors had arrived. First Mrs. Jane jumped out, then she helped Tara down from the back seat, and the two dachshunds raced round and round the garden playing chases, until Tara stopped and said to Willoughby, "You haven't seen my surprise yet." Willoughby had been wondering about the surprise. Mrs. Jane opened the back flap of the car and lifted out a big box. Willoughby could hear noises coming from it, little woofs and squeaks. Mrs. Jane reached into the box and lifted out a tiny puppy. It was so small she could hold it in one hand, not a big, almost grown-up puppy like Willoughby. A tiny new puppy who squeaked and tried to make proper woofing sounds, but didn't manage to sound like a grown-up dog. Willoughby sniffed at it and gave it a gentle lick, and it licked him back. "This is Eenie," said Mrs. Jane proudly. "And this is Meenie," and she lifted out a third puppy, "and this is Miney." Willoughby thought the puppies were beautiful, with long fringed ears and black coats with brown paws and brown noses. Willoughby had a black coat too, and brown paws and a brown nose, but his coat was smooth and shiny, not long and curly like the new little girl puppies. Then Tara said proudly, "I had 4 puppies last month, and we have given them kennel names until they go to their new homes at Christmas, and have proper names from their new misses and masters." Willoughby thought they were fine little dogs. He felt that he was almost grown up. And he stopped and thought. Tara had said she had 4 pups, but Willoughby could count. He had 1 nose and 1 tail. He had 2 eyes and 2 ears. And he had 4 paws. Mrs. Jane had only brought out 3 puppies. He woofed and tried to look into the box. Mrs. Jane laughed. "It's all right, Willoughby. I haven't forgotten I had 4 puppies." Mrs. Jane lifted out the last tiny dog. "This is Moe," she said. Willoughby had such a surprise. Moe wasn't like his sisters at all. He was a brown dachshund with a smooth coat and smooth ears, just like Willoughby's ears. Willoughby thought it was one of the best surprises he had ever had. He watched Tara carefully lift the new puppies into the big basket Mrs. Ann had put beside the warm stove, and Tara told him how she was going to stay at the garden centre until Christmas, when the new puppies would go to their new homes and be given grown-up names. For the next few weeks Willoughby had a wonderful time. He played catch-my-ball with the girl puppies and football with Moe, and was tired out every night. Tara was very proud of her family, but both dachshunds agreed that looking after 4 very little puppies was hard work, because they were so very little and mischievous. One day Eenie even sat in Willoughby's bowl. There was so much to teach the little ones that Willoughby thought he was grown up, although he was really just a puppy. He tried to teach Minnie how to walk on a lead, and to show Minnie not to put her long ears in her milk, but the girl puppies laughed at him. Moe was different. He admired Willoughby and tried to do what Willoughby did, even helping him pick up litter in the garden centre when Willoughby explained he was a working dog and helped Grandpa Tom. The puppies grew bigger every week, and 3 weeks before Christmas Mr. Jack looked out his paint pots. First his red paint pot, then his black pot. He wanted to make a notice to hang on the front gate of the garden centre. Mrs. Jane was very sad to lose the puppies, but she knew it was time for them to find their own missus or master, and to have their own baskets and their own family to love them and look after them. The puppies were very excited and were looking forward to their new lives. Mr. Jack and Mrs. Jane and Mrs. Ann wanted to make sure that each one went to a good home, where it would be loved and have its own basket. Mr. Jack lifted up his black paintbrush and wrote, "Puppies for sale." Then underneath he wrote in red paint, "A puppy is for life, not just for Christmas." Soon families came from the town to choose a puppy, and Mrs. Jane made sure they had good homes to go to on Christmas Eve. All the families wanted a girl puppy with long fringed ears. No one wanted the boy puppy with his plain brown ears, and he was very sad. He wanted a family to love him and give him his own basket. On Christmas Eve, Mrs. Jane gave all the puppies a great big hug. "Now, puppies," she said, "remember, if someone has changed their mind about having you, I will love to have you back with me, and you can share my basket until we can put a puppy for sale advert in the newspaper after Christmas." Mr. Jack put all the puppies into a box in the back of his old van. "Your new owners are coming to collect you from the Christmas fair," he said. "I'm sure they won't have changed their minds about having you, and I think someone at the Christmas market will want to buy Moe." Eenie, Minnie and Miney were happy, and they made fun of their brother. "We're going to new homes," they said. "No one wanted you. You have plain ears, not like ours." The boy puppy was cross and pulled their tails. Just then the van stopped at the traffic lights, and the back door opened. "He's a bad puppy. He pulled our tails. Let's throw that naughty puppy out," said Minnie. "Yes, let's," said her two sisters, and they threw the boy puppy out of the back of the van. The traffic lights changed colour, and the old van drove off. Little Moe was left by the side of the road. He was sure Mr. Jack would come back for him, so he sat and waited. He waited and waited, but the old van didn't come back, and the snow came on. The snowflakes drifted down from the dark sky. The puppy was cold, so he crept under the hedge as the sky became darker. Moe was sad and lonely, but Mr. Jack did not come back, because he didn't know the puppy had fallen out of the van. Little Moe saw some cottages nearby, so he trotted towards their warm lights. Perhaps someone there would want a brown puppy with plain ears. But as he came near the cottages, their lights went out one by one. Suddenly a sleigh passed him, pulled by reindeer, and driven by an old man with a white beard and wearing a red coat. Santa Claus, the puppy thought. The sleigh stopped, and Santa Claus lifted a sack of parcels and climbed up the first cottage to the chimney. Then he came back and carried some more parcels to the second cottage, and then into the third cottage. Out of nowhere 2 men appeared and crept up the road. They had on striped jumpers and wore black masks, and had big bags labelled swag. "They're thieves," Moe said to himself. "They're going to steal the Christmas presents." Santa Claus was nowhere in sight. "Oh dear, there's only me. I must do something to save the children's Christmas presents." Moe rushed up to the first thief and barked and barked. And then he grabbed the man's trousers and pulled as hard as he could pull. "Be quiet," the thief hissed. "You will wake everyone." At that moment Santa Claus appeared, and the thieves dropped their bags and ran off down the road into the night. Santa Claus shook his head as he watched them run away. "It's sad that anyone would want to steal children's Christmas presents. Well done, Poppy. You have saved the gifts, and that was a brave thing for a little dog to do." As Santa Claus picked up all the presents, he asked, "What are you doing here on a cold, dark night like this?" "I fell out of Mr. Jack's van," explained the puppy. "Now I am lost." Moe took a big breath and tried hard not to cry. He was so cold and so scared of never finding his way back to Mrs. Jane and his mother. "Come and sit in my warm sleigh and tell me your story, little dog," said Santa Claus. "Well," said the puppy, "we were on our way to the Christmas market." Before he could say anything else, Santa Claus clapped his hand to his head and cried out, "The Christmas market! I was on my way there to buy a present for Mrs. Claus, and now it will be closed, and she won't have anything for Christmas." Little boy Poppy was sad. If the Christmas market was closed, there would be no one to buy him. Suddenly, he had a wonderful thought. "Please, Mr. Claus," he said, "perhaps Mrs. Claus would like to have me for a present." Santa Claus picked up the puppy. "That's a great idea," he said happily. Moe's tail began to wag, faster and faster. "But don't you belong to someone? How did you come to be here on this lonely road? Tell me your story, please," added Santa. Moe's tail stopped wagging. He was sad. If he said he was a bad puppy with plain brown ears, Mr. Claus might not want to give him as a present to Mrs. Claus after all. He hung his head. There would be no new home for him that night, no warm basket, and no food. The little puppy explained that his sisters had pushed him out of the van, and Mr. Jack didn't know, and had driven off without him. "Why did your sisters do that?" asked Santa Claus. "They were rude and horrid to me, because I have plain ears," said Moe unhappily. "They are girls and have long ears with curly fringes, so they were all chosen as Christmas presents, and I wasn't, so I pulled their tails. They said I was a bad puppy." A tear squeezed itself out of his eye. He wanted so much to be given a home and a basket all for himself. But who wants a bad puppy? Santa Claus laughed. That wasn't such a bad thing to do. "Naughty, yes, but not bad enough to make you a bad puppy. When I was young, I used to pull my sisters' pigtails when they were rude to me." The puppy's tail began to wag again when Santa Claus added, "You are just the puppy for my wife. I will tell her what a brave dog you were when you chased away the thieves. I saw that man kick you, but you didn't give up. And if it hadn't been for you, there would be some children without Christmas presents this year." Santa Claus picked up the last of the presents and delivered them to their owners. Then, after tucking the little puppy inside his warm red jacket, he drove his sleigh through the cold night air to Northland. Mrs. Claus met them at the door. She was a stout, happy lady in a red dress. She had been making Christmas dinner, and her hands were white with flour. Her big smile became wider and wider when Santa Claus pulled the puppy out of his coat. "Happy Christmas, Lucia. I haven't forgotten your present this year." Mrs. Claus wiped her hands and hugged the puppy close. "Welcome home, puppy," she said. "You look so tired and hungry, but what handsome silky ears you have." She kissed Santa Claus and told him it was the finest present he had ever given to her, and she gave Moe a big bowl of food in front of the cosy fire. Santa Claus told Mrs. Claus what a brave dog he was. "I will look after him every day," said Mrs. Claus firmly, "except on Christmas Eve, when you must have him, Nicholas, to guard your sleigh while you are delivering presents." Then she gave Santa Claus his Christmas present, a nice long red scarf that she had knitted. and afterwards she fetched out a big ball of red wool and her knitting needles. "It's cold here in Northland, so I will knit a jumper for my puppy, and it will be red like our clothes." After he had had his Christmas dinner, Santa Claus pulled on his boots again, then went out to the barn where there was a big cupboard marked "Unwanted Gifts." "I know there is just what I want in here," he muttered, and a few minutes later he found a fine dog basket and carried it indoors. "Happy Christmas, little one. Welcome to your new home." The puppy was so happy. He had his own basket, and he was even to have a Christmas present knitted by Mrs. Claus. He hoped Eenie, Meenie and Miney were as happy as he was, and had fine new homes and baskets like his, but he was sure he must be the happiest dog in the whole wide world. "Now," said Santa, "we have one more thing to do before we settle down." He wrote a note explaining how he had found Moe by the roadside, and described how the little puppy had scared away the thieves. He signed the letter "Nicholas Claus," then wrapped the note round some money to pay for the puppy. "My reindeer are tired. We will use my little sleigh, the one Mrs. Claus uses when she goes to the supermarket, and you can guide me to the garden centre." Everyone at the Willow Garden Centre was very sad when Mr. Jack came home and told them Moe was lost. They decided it was too late that night to do anything, but that they would go out first thing in the morning to search for him. Willoughby was especially sad, because he had liked Moe better than any of the puppies, because he had smooth ears just like Willoughby's own, even if they were a different colour from his. Willoughby went out through the dog flap in the kitchen door, stopped, and woofed when he saw a note lying on the doorstep. He looked up into the moonlight sky and saw a little sleigh pulled by one reindeer, and looking down at him and waving was Moe. Willoughby woofed, and all the family came outside to find out what was wrong. They looked up. Moe waved even harder, until the sleigh turned round and sailed off. The three people looked at each other. "I don't think I can believe my own eyes," said Mr. Jack. Then Mrs. Jane read the note and said, "I think you can, and that was definitely a dog like Moe in the back of the sleigh." Willoughby was happy again. Moe was all right. He wasn't lost after all. He had found a new home. Now, if you should see Santa Claus' sleigh on a Christmas Eve, look very carefully, and you will see a little brown head looking out. It is the puppy, guarding the children's Christmas presents to make sure every child has a happy Christmas. And what name do you think Santa and Mrs. Claus gave their puppy? Well, I think I will let you guess.